Hello, everyone, and welcome back for the second session of the day. Welcome to our new guests, if you just joined us, and to all of those online. We have an incredible session lined up, but we actually have a very special guest. As someone said, oh my God, I can't believe he's here. But we have Charles Clover of the Blue Marine Foundation, who's a real pioneer in the ocean space, who's come to share some welcome words. So please, we give a huge round of applause for Charles.
Hi. And thank you very much for having me. And thank you to Amber Nuttall, who is our most effective ocean ambassador for Blue Marine Foundation, which I helped to found about 10 years ago. It's actually now 11 years ago. Before that, I was a journalist, an environmental journalist for a long, long time. I was at the first meeting of IPCC. I was on the Hadley Centre lawn when Mrs. Thatcher opened it. I was at the first COP, which was Rio. And I've been at an awful lot of the COPs ever since. Not as many as Al Gore, who was speaking immensely well yesterday, and who quoted Churchill saying, this is no longer the time for half measures and equivocation. This is a time of consequences. And that is where we are, and we've only just realized it, and we're 30 years in. We're halfway through my life has come to getting us this far, to Glasgow, and we still haven't got an ocean pavilion, we still haven't got oceans in the treaty, we still haven't got blue carbon in the IPCC inventories and being considered by these word-fest merchants over the road. And that's not very good, because we need to use the sea, we need to use all its mechanisms, we need to use nature to help nature help us to save ourselves. And we're a long time down this road, and I'm not going to be here when the rest of the work is done, eventually. And so that is why this panel of people who are all younger than me are so important, and their energy is incredibly important, because to get those things into the treaty will take another 5 years or so, maybe 10. And, you know, we haven't got time. This is the thing we're learning from this whole process, is that the energy levels, the willingness of everybody to do it is now there, but actually the impedimenta, the sheer bureaucratic complexity of getting this thing done is immense. And therefore, these people are the future. And they've got a lot of work to do. So listen to them, help them, and encourage them, and thank them. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. No better way to start. So now let's please give a big warm round of applause for our excellent panel who's joined us here from UK and from Palau.
Just check the mic's working. Welcome. We will dive in to, I'm really excited actually. We've been having a little catch up just before we stepped onto the stage, and I'm super excited about the conversations and the expertise and wealth of knowledge and experience that we've got up here on the stage today. But I'm going to start off by transporting you to the other side of the world. Oh, I've got a clicker here. My apologies. To a blank screen. Hold on a moment. Hold that thought. Slight technical issue. I'm going to start off by transporting you to the other side of the world. We have one ocean. And we have one ocean, therefore, our ocean is interlinked. And we heard some amazing talks this morning about the impacts of what we do in one place, or the effects of what we do in one place and the impacts that has on another, all the way on the other side of the planet. And the reason I got into marine conservation was I actually had to physically go to the other side of the planet to make a realization. I am a geography teacher by trade, although previously, not sure this is, oh, to you, great. Maybe I'm the technical difficulty. Anyway, it's a nice picture. I took this, quite proud of it. I'm not even a photographer. Yeah, and I moved to live and teach in Indonesia, and I was shocked when I stepped off the plane and saw litter absolutely everywhere, on every street corner and on every beach. And as a geographer, I'd moved there, excited to teach about my subject, at the foothills of volcanoes, in front of coral reefs, being able to look out the window out into the ocean. And yet every day I was quite upset by this. But it's what it taught me that's important. It taught me that working with an empowered group of young people is incredibly motivating. And the students wanted to do something to protect their island home. And so we went down and I facilitated beach cleans for them, and we went down, but they started to question what was going on when every time we returned to the beach, the litter had returned as well. And so they started looking within their own community at the upstream solutions that they could do, the actions they could take, the education they could pass on to their elders so that there could be a real change in behaviours that came from a systems stance, which was really empowering and very powerful. But what it also did is make me question what's happened to every piece of plastic that I've ever used in the UK. Because it's not so in your face over here. We are much better at hiding the problem. So I started to look at perhaps thinking about maybe how many toothbrushes I'd used in my lifetime, which is always a statistic that makes me feel a bit mortified at how much plastic I've put out into our planet in my lifetime. And I looked into our recycling system, and this was taken in the Wandsworth recycling system seen in London. And I started to discover that actually every bit of plastic that I've ever used, every toothbrush, every cup, every toy from McDonald's, not that I was really allowed to go there as a child, is still on our planet somewhere. It may be broken up or fragmented into millions of different pieces. It may be buried in landfill. It may have been shipped abroad and buried in another country overseas. Yet it's still here on our planet, and we only have one planet. And so I was then lucky enough, taking what I'd learned from living in Indonesia, to join eXXpedition, an organisation running all-female sailing voyages, carrying out scientific research into plastic pollution, learning about it, educating about it, and advocating for change. And on this boat, we have 10 amazing women. It's an all-female crew from all different walks of life, all different experience and expertise in different countries, coming together to discuss this issue from lots of different perspectives, which is really a powerful learning experience for us on board. But what's most impressive is that then those women feel empowered to go back to their own communities to pass on that education from a bottom-up perspective and looking at their own systems that are relevant and appropriate changes that they can make within their spheres of influence. And I did this because it became apparent that actually our world is one ocean. You can see here a simulation of the ocean currents going into these 5 gyres or accumulation plastic zones that we find out in our ocean. And in 2018, I was, would I say lucky enough? Yes, it was an absolute epic experience to sail across the North Pacific Gyre, which is probably the most famous of these 5, termed the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, home of the Ocean Cleanup Project and lots of media coverage. Yet, although I'd heard about it and talked about it, I was still shocked with what we found. And that's a video that doesn't work, that talks about all the things that we saw out on the ocean. But what was the most shocking thing wasn't the toilet seat that you saw off the side of the boat, miles away from land. It wasn't the bottle. It wasn't the washing basket. It was the microplastics, the fragmented, larger pieces that have been exposed to UV rays, been exposed to the elements, and disintegrated or broken up into so many pieces that are smaller than your little fingernail that they're almost impossible to clean up. Our ocean is vast, and when we took this net, this manta trawl through the water, it's got a fine mesh net at the end of it, we were picking up huge samples. And it was very upsetting because we know that these microplastics are entering our food chain. We also know that these plastics, as they stand, emit CO2 at every stage of the plastic cycle, from its production all the way through to when it's fragmenting. So it is having a huge impact on our wider health of our planet, as well as our food chains and ecosystems. And I then had a choice. So I'd sailed across this ocean. It had been an epic experience once I'd got over the seasickness. And I had a choice to take this a little bit further. And the path I chose to carve out in my ocean was to join eXXpedition to sail around the world. And we had an epic journey until we got to Tahiti. Then, like the rest of the world, we stopped. It was March 2020. We just about managed to get everyone home. The boat is still, as far as I'm aware, in Tahiti. And we are all now in our respective countries thinking about what we can do next. We took this learning online, still managing to bring together a community of change makers to learn and take action in their local communities, and working with different countries, albeit remotely. But one thing that we were doing out at sea wasn't just talking about it. It was about finding out more, getting data and knowledge to pass that on, to learn from our data what we can actually do. And you can see here a diagram showing the different aspects that we were looking at. We were trying to take a holistic approach. There had been a lot of research done out at sea. We know that there's plastic out there. There's been research done on land, looking at the different types of litter that we've got in our environment. And there's obviously the kind of qualitative research that you do, talking with local communities as well. And what we found out was pretty shocking. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's me look like I'm just confused, but looking very intently at what is a cod end full of like sea detritus, if you like, the bits of seaweed. We were in the Caribbean when this photo was taken, so there was quite a lot of sargassum, but it was embedded with lots of different bits of microplastic. And it's when you start to take this down on board that you just see how interwoven our plastic that we've created as humans is with the ecosystem. So we've got juvenile fish, we've got nudibranch, we've got lots of them in the red microplastics or fragments of plastic. But what we're trying to do is not just know that they're there, we want to do something with this. Okay, we want to be able to use it to look at upstream solutions. So we managed to get on board a FTIR piece of equipment that identifies the polymer type of the plastic. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of different types of plastic, which just makes it a much more complex system or much more complex item to clean up from our natural world. But we could identify, for example, this sample here that you see me holding. It's then put through the piece of scientific equipment, and it's compared to a library of the spectrum so that we can work out what type of plastic it is. And this is polyethylene. Great, so that's polyethylene. What can we do with that piece of information? Well, we can start to think about what polyethylene is used for and where and how it is mismanaged that leaks out into our environment. When we look at the different places that we went to in the Caribbean, this was a paper that was recently published in the summer, we can see that actually, although we're in one regional ocean, we're in the Caribbean Sea, we've still got a big difference in the amount of microplastics and the amount of identifiable different polymers that we're picking up in our sample. It's a hugely complex issue. So we are then comparing that as well with our land-based surveys. What plastic are we finding on land and in what quantities? Where is it being mismanaged, and what support might those communities therefore need to be able to either eliminate plastic waste or manage it better that's appropriate to those communities? And the answer is, on every beach, on every street corner, there is a very complex, because there's a very different type of litter that we're finding. Some of that litter is being washed up by the ocean currents onto land. Some of that litter has come directly from land. and different communities tend to have different habits that produce different types of waste. But taking a holistic approach, and the word holistic has been used a lot in today's talks, taking a holistic approach to this problem is really important, because we need to understand where it's coming from all the way through to what we can do about it, but also the other factors that are putting pressure on our oceans are just as important to be able to understand to solve this particular issue of plastic pollution. And the big question that I'm going to leave you with is, yes, we've spoken a lot about consumer responsibility as well, and I 100% agree that I think the uprising, if you like, of the consumer, of the youth, of the people to talk about this from actually it needs to come from top down as well is hugely important, and I feel that those voices have been amplified over the last couple of weeks. But there is still the question, is this yours? We are all responsible. There are hundreds of solutions. We can all do something, but as I said, we do need to look back on land at what we can do to help save our oceans. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to I am going to welcome Lauren, who's going to talk through some of her research.
Thank you. Okay, what do I do to start? There we go. That's me. Right. All right, so I'm Lauren Biermann from Plymouth Marine Laboratory, and I'm going to talk to you today about plastics and satellites. But before I get into that, I'm going to... Lovely animation. There we go. Before I do that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about plastics themselves. Can anyone tell me what the raw materials of plastics are? Yes. Correct. They're fossil fuels. They're oil, gas, and coal. That's what we use to make plastics. But when people start talking about plastics, they often throw numbers like millions of tons. I don't know about you guys, but I can't relate to millions of tons. I've never seen a million of tons of anything. It's a number that doesn't connect and it doesn't compute. But I really like this report that was published by the Tier Fund organization last year. And what they did was they made it in the size of football fields. Now, I know what a football field is, and I'd say that this venue is about the quarter of the size of a football field. So let's use this as a representative example. Now, 4 companies filled this venue to a depth of 40 centimeters every 20 minutes. That's about here, right? So in the time that we're talking, us as speakers would be wading almost waist deep through plastic waste discarded from just 4 companies in across 6 countries. That is a number that I can connect to in my head. But why are we talking about plastics at COP? Specifically, what has plastics got to do with climate change? Well, what do we do with football fields on football fields of discarded plastic waste? I can tell you right now, we're not recycling it. We're putting it into landfill, but more specifically, we're burning them. Sorry. Yeah. And the emissions from the burning of this plastic waste from just those 4 companies, Coca-Cola, Nestle, PepsiCo, Unilever, that is the same as 2 million cars operating in the UK. So from cradle, the extraction of fossil fuels, this is a carbon dioxide fossil fuel issue, all of the way to grave, because we're burning it and we're emitting those fossil fuels plus dioxins and other toxins into the atmosphere. And there again, the statistics are staggering, but if we go back 1 click, please. The football fields that we're talking about are from developing countries, but actually North America and Europe are some of the biggest producers of plastics in the first place. And we're also responsible for almost 50% of global plastic waste trade, meaning that the toothbrush from Sally may very well end up on a beach in Thailand. Sorry about that. But why aren't we recycling our way out of it? If we can, sorry. Let me tell you now that again, millions of pounds. I don't know what that means, but I know what 9% of something looks like, and that's little. 9% of of plastics produced ever throughout time have been recycled, less than. That's an absolutely insignificant amount when we're talking about billions. You don't know what billions mean, but you know that 9% is too little. And the reason for that is it's an extractive industry. The petrochemical industry wants to keep removing fossil fuels from the ground, but also it's cheaper for them to produce plastics from scratch than it is currently to recycle them. And this is where we are today. And if you believed in recycling, and I'm sure you have, because I certainly have, I was religious about putting stuff in the right bin, that's because there's been a very well-coordinated and well-funded campaign to tell you that recycling is taking care of our plastic problem. And if you've worked in climate change, you will recognize these names. If you can do it again, sorry. It's Exxon, it's Dow, it's DuPont. They've been funding adverts about recycling since the 90s, and they've known since the 1970s that recycling of plastics isn't going to work enough. So they've known, they've funded disinformation campaigns. If you work in climate change, this is a very familiar tale. Okay. We have to accept that plastics will continue to be produced. Not all of them are bad. Some of them make our cars lighter, more fuel efficient. My laptop's made out of a lot of plastic components. So we accept that plastics will continue to be produced. We have to understand that recycling as it stands today and possibly into the future is not going to be enough to get us out of this. So we have to acknowledge within this imperfect system of global plastic trades and football fields produced every 20 minutes, that the plastics are going to leak from these systems into the ocean. And this is where I come in. Now, Sally showed you that amazing animation, that global circulation model. Satellites sit somewhere in between the real work that you do on ships, where you take those manta rays and you start to count individual pieces of plastics or from your beach cleans, and those global circulation models. Satellites sit in between. And this science is still very new, though. It was only for the first time last year that scientists were able to demonstrate that satellites could be used for this kind of work. But there are caveats. This is not a silver bullet either. When I talk about macroplastics in my work, I'm talking about stuff that you can hold in your hand. You know, the literature says macroplastics are anything bigger than 5 millimeters. I'm talking about the polystyrene container that your takeaway comes in. Coastal waters. Sorry if we can go back one. Coastal waters, that's where the satellites are collecting the data, but that's okay because that's where most of the plastic leakage happens. And floating, anything below the surface of the water, and that's where the majority of plastics go. I can only see what's sitting on the surface. But the incentive is high because finding out where hotspots are, where plastics are entering the open ocean, we have an imperative to do that because once they're in the open ocean, they're free to do all sorts of nefarious things. And I don't need to put pictures up here. They're living rent-free in your head. You've got turtles with plastic straws. You've got birds. You've seen it all. I don't need to put up the image of animals that have ingested or become entangled with plastics. But the thing that scares me is what Sally was talking about. Those macroplastics will break into smaller and smaller fragments. And once they're microplastics, how on earth are we going to remove them? Now, satellites are a really good source of information, and I have to tell you, if you didn't know this already, most of the data collected by satellites is available for free. So you guys can leave here today and go and do any work that you want to do, really, on the surface of the Earth using satellites. Now, but they all do quite different things, and the satellite that I used for my work is called Sentinel-2, and the reason for that is he's got really great spatial resolution. He collects data at 10-meter spatial resolution, but more specifically, he's got great eyes. Really like Sentinel-2's eyes. You can just go again. There we go. And I'm going to show you what I mean. So this is a typical scene. This is how Sentinel-2 sees the world. This is an image of Da Nang in Vietnam. And what Sentinel-2 has done here is it has taken information in the visible spectrum, the red, the green, and the blue bands, and it's recreated what our human eyes would see. But it's a little bit hazy, so you and I right now, we're going to do a complicated scientific calculation. We're going to remove the contribution of the atmosphere through an atmospheric correction. Well done, guys. We've just done an atmospheric correction. That's very hard, and you've just done it very well. And what you can see is now that the haze is removed, things are a bit clearer. I've highlighted the image to show off those sub-mesoscale features in the water, those eddies. But what I'm actually going to ask you to do is ignore the visible light, and I'm going to ask Sentinel-2 to show us what it saw in the near-infrared. And this is very simple. Water absorbs light very strongly in the near-infrared wavelengths of light. Anything floating on the surface of the water, by comparison is going to reflect. So if we focus on these 4 areas over here, you can't really see anything except blue in those, but if I move us into the near infrared, you should start be able to see a lot of white stuff in those circles, right? And that's because there's stuff floating there. Now, this isn't necessarily plastic in these examples, but it's true for seaweed, for boats, and for plastics. And if we zoom in on this area over here with a commercial satellite, what we see is aquaculture cages. And the components of those are plastic as well. So actually, my algorithm works very well at picking these up as well. This is the image that started everything in my research. This is off the east coast of Scotland. That's the Isle of May. I'm going to do an atmospheric correction with you now, so let's quickly take away the contribution of the atmosphere, and you'll see a beautiful front just off the Isle of May over there in the red, the green, and the blue. And if we move into the near infrared now, that is debris. And it's a combination of plastics and seaweed that's moving towards what is essentially a bird and seal sanctuary. And that was the first time I saw something floating in the environment that I couldn't recognize as a natural source of debris. And actually, when I look at this image retrospectively now, I don't really think about the debris. I wonder what these boats saw, because those 3 dots over there are actually boats. So if we move to the next slide, I've circled them in yellow. I wish we'd had a network of people out there collecting data, because I have to guess to a large, not guess, but I have to extrapolate a little bit about what I'm seeing. But those boats saw in real life what was happening along that front. And so we've started a NASA project called Go See Science, if we go to the next slide. And if you ever are out on a ferry or on it, out on the water at all, and you see something like that, please go to iNaturalist and tell me about it, because I'll match it with the satellite data and I'll be able to tell you what was there from space. And often we're looking at things like fronts or submesoscale features to gather the materials, and this is often what it looks like in the natural environment. That is a front that has gathered natural materials and plastics together. This is about the size of a Sentinel-2 pixel, and so we need it to be quite filled. Individual water bottles, I'm never going to see them from space using the free satellite data I have access to from the European Space Agency and through the Copernicus program. But if it's filled like that, I can see the plastics. Natural materials are abundant, and so but plastics are often mixed in with those natural materials. And so you don't need to take my word for it. You can go look just outside of the ferry. There's natural materials and plastics. That's exactly what I'm looking for in the natural environment. Okay, I've had a few success stories around the globe, and what we're hoping at PML is to roll out a near real-time global map of hotspots, not just to tell people where the problem is, but also to show off places that have succeeded at reducing the marine plastic pollution issue, either by refusing plastic waste from developed countries or by improving their land management practices like Sally was talking about. So I feel like there's a lot of hope in the work that we're doing, because this barely existed a year or 2 ago, and we're progressing it all of the time. And just to end off, I just want to say it's not just me. I have a phenomenal group of people that I'm working with, loads of organizations that are giving their time freely to contribute to the solutions. But also, I want to say thank you to you guys for being here, because honestly, it's the public that is driving the pressure on the plastic pollution issue. And if we can get legislative responses to single-use plastics, I think will really make a huge impact on the marine environment. So thank you to all of you. And that's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lauren. Right, well, you've heard from me and you've heard from Lauren, but I'd love to hear from our other 3 panelists that we're lucky enough to have on stage today. So, Jennifer, I don't know if you want to give a few words to introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. My name is Jennifer Koskinen. Even though I have a perfect U.S.-American accent, I'm from Palau, and I've got a colleague from Palau here. There's Kevin right there. Say hi to Kevin. There is a small group of us that came. We are part of the Palau delegation, and our aim here is to try and activate exactly what the last 2 speakers have talked about. How can we make sure that the plastics that are in our oceans are getting addressed before they get into the ocean? So I'll just give you an example. We in Palau do a lot of beach cleanups. and I will be doing it for the rest of my life. And most of this stuff gets photographed, and we have literati, and they're amazing. We could take some pictures with the literati and find out where it came from. But the reality is, you can't walk down a beach without stuff that's coming from Asia. We started something called the Palau National Marine Sanctuary. I'd like to also suggest that you speak to your own leaders, that it's not just little old Palau that can close its exclusive economic zone. That's 200 miles off of our shores, over 80% of it, to extractive activities. Others can do it. It's something we just have to demand. It's not a question anymore. Palau is living with the environmental crisis that everybody keeps talking about predicting. We literally are living in it. So we're not on the front lines any longer. We're actually living through it. My own front yard, I'm very fortunate. I live on the water. But a king high tide that comes through, and a combination of a typhoon, which we never used to have, but now we've had 3 in a row, 1 this year, will make my home go away. And that's literally what's happening. It's not just a dramatic statement, it's the fact. And I don't want that to be the new norm. I don't want to be wearing a mask. I don't want to be running around telling my kids that they need to be worried about the food that they eat because there's plastics in it, or be worried about the fact that when I'm gone and they're raising their own children, they're going to have to think of an alternative Palau to live in. That is a scary consideration for me, and it's not just a statistic. And so I hope that we all take action in a very specific way. There's a Palauan saying, when you plant the seed in your heart that you're going to do something, then you can do it, and there's no questioning about it. You just take action, and everybody has a role and a responsibility, and I appreciate the time to be able to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hugo.
Amazing work. I'm Hugo Tagholm. I run the marine conservation and campaigning charity Surface Against Sewage. And somewhat of a misnomer, we don't just work on sewage, and more than sewage and more than surface. And we're doing a lot of work on plastic pollution from the front line, from beaches around the UK and around the world to an extent. To document, to track plastic pollution, and to engage people with it, but it's all in the aim to create systems change. We know, as we've just heard, that we can't pick our way out of the problem. There's just far too much plastic out there already. And we're working hard to create the systems change that's needed through work with pressuring government to bring in the right legislation on that issue specifically, and not exclusively. And I'll talk a little bit about sewage pollution too, a major source of microplastics into our oceans. But the pace of change is slow. We've been talking about plastic pollution in a really big way since 2017, since the Blue Planet came out. We've been working on it a lot longer than that. I've got 2 of my team here, Amy and Elsa, who are incredible campaigners with us. And we haven't seen the change really take hold yet. There are systems that can contain and control plastic much better than we have at the moment. We recently heard Boris Johnson talking about the failure of recycling. I think pretty unhelpfully, actually. I think he wants to undermine it. He wants to make everything about individual responsibility. We've just heard about littering too. I hate the word littering. It gives all of us a responsibility of looking after plastic pollution. It's actually a systems failure. So we're campaigning hard for deposit return schemes, other sorts of interventions that can keep plastic in the economy rather than on our beaches and in pristine and precious habitats that my colleagues here on the panel are fighting hard to protect. So yeah, we're working with hundreds of thousands of volunteers at the beachfront. We have a route into government at the major moments like COP26, which is working but not fast enough. We keep hearing here that we need to go faster, harder, and more radical on the interventions on climate. And let's not forget that the plastic pollution is really just a proxy for climate change and the climate emergency. They are proxy for the consumption that's just going too fast, that is destroying planet ocean. And so we're very focused on making these campaigns accessible to people, but to create the change that the world now needs to see.
Thank you. And Dan.
Thanks, Sally. And thanks to Amber and Al and the One Young World team for having us out here. It's actually incredibly refreshing after a solid week in an airless room to be on a boat and see these speaker rigs swinging around. And, you know, we're not quite in the sea. We're not in Tahiti like Sally's boat, sadly. But we're connected to it, and you can see that and feel that in the momentum of this vessel. And I learned this morning that sometimes up the Clyde, you'll get a run of sprat, and you'll get millions of tiny fish up here in, you know, at the heart of the city. And yeah, I think it shows how this is all connected. And I learned a whole load of wonderful things yesterday. I sat on a panel with a professor from PML, and he was talking about kelp. It was the only seaweed-dedicated event at the whole of COP26. And he was talking about the way in which kelp communicates with its surrounding environment, and it uses chemicals to draw in good microbes from the water that support it and help it. And if it's unwell and unhappy, or pollution's affecting it, then it will then draw in bad microbes. And in a similar way to the human microbiome, it communicates with the environment around it. It's kind of extraordinary. And I asked another very eminent scientist the other day. He was talking about seagrass and the way seagrass grows rhizomatically, which is that it grows under the, you plant a seagrass seed, it grows under the sediment, and then it pokes its head up. And I was asking him, okay, does that mean like forests, it can communicate under the water? And he said, I've got no idea. And I said, does anyone know? And he said, no, probably not. So it shows just how little we understand about these extraordinary habitats and ecosystems in the ocean. The sea's a complex thing. And I think that's probably why it's a footnote at the conversations down the road in the last week. And although a lot has been done and a lot's been said, there's an enormous amount of platitudes and lip service. And actually, as a response to the growing emergency, the ocean represents a hugely powerful climate change solution. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily being carried through in urgency in what's been said. And most of those negotiators will go back to their comfortable lives, and without really any understanding of the implications of what's happened. Whereas people like my colleague here from a large ocean state and a leader in this space, it's felt only too clearly. We have at Blue Marine Foundation, we've pushed really hard for the ocean to be represented at COP26. We have a large-scale video installation within the main cafe, which is wonderful to see. And it's, there's blue carbon habitats. People keep coming up and saying, wow, that's so cool. It's so good to have, the ocean represented like that. The cafe smells quite strongly of fish. And that fish, a friend of mine informed me, is trawled. So, it shows, like, look at the ocean. We didn't even look at this, It's embarrassing. So, what we've been trying to do is raise the profile of the ocean as a climate change solution, to uncover some of the underlying knowledge that is really not yet understood about blue carbon habitats and the value that they could provide. And what I've particularly been trying to do is talk to people about ocean life and about these extraordinary things out there, because in a world where everything gets reduced to zeros and ones, and people talking at brunch this morning, we're talking the most incomprehensible financial terms. We've got it, much as the youth voice has been incredible to see this week and very inspiring. There's got to be people talking in there talking about the life that we're all seeking to protect. And if I had a couple of asks for the youth, it's that they carry that message forward and push that. So that's me.
Thank you very much. On that note, my other hat that I wear on a regular day-to-day basis is I'm actually a classroom geography teacher. And obviously environmental issues come into the curriculum all of the time. of how they are and the knowledge about them. We're still making strides in the legislative curriculum as to how students take action, which we'll get onto later. But one of my students this week actually asked me, Miss, how come the ocean covers 71% of our planet and, you know, it can sequester carbon? Why is it not, why haven't we seen anything in the media that's come out of the conference in Glasgow? From what you've all said, we obviously all think that ocean should be higher up the agenda. Why, you kind of all told us why it's important to you, but Dan, in particular, you do a lot of work in blue carbon. And Blue Marine Foundation, as you've just said, have been working, looking at new opportunities, new projects to be able to bring that about in terms of conservation. How do we tackle that? How do we bring that beyond the visual display in the cafe smelling of fish to real life, tangible action?
It's such a good question. I mean, if you take something like kelp, you know, all of these different, I got into this, I was living up in the outer Orkney Islands for a bit, about 12 years ago, and I was freediving a fair bit in kelp forest, and the level of large fish in the kelp forest was like nothing I'd ever seen down in the southwest of England. And if you imagine kelp grew on land at the rate it does in the sea, and provided all of those incredible biodiversity benefits, all of the other things that it does, and sequestered and stored carbon, you know, that you'd be seeing multi-billion-dollar kelp commitments just as you would trees. So I think it's about education, and also I think it's just about demanding it. It's about saying, you know, this is the time for the ocean to be understood. It's always about science. We announced a $15 million science program on Friday, which is fantastic, and will help to answer some key questions around sediment carbon. Not the most glamorous blue carbon habitat, but the biggest carbon sink on Earth. So I've got no idea. That's the answer to my question.
Can I interrupt?
Education. Anyone else?
Yes. One of the biggest challenges for us is the fisheries. These fishing companies are aggressive. And, you know, I feel a little bit underwhelming here because I don't have a PhD or a master's. I just am a person who cares about my country, and that's why I got started in this work. But the reality is it's a consumer demand issue. We've got consumers who want very, very low cost protein, like tunas in a can, and then we've got these other extremes. We've got these consumers in Asia who want bluefin tuna, and they want that, you know, specially presented to them. And they believe that they can manage nature. They believe that they can take a place and go ahead and manage it and control it, and then somehow Palau will get the pennies on the billions that they're making. And the reality is, how can we say no when you get brown bags of payments from these fishing companies just dropped on your table? And that's the reality, is that there's an insufficient amount of work in the space of IUU, and I believe that that's just surrounding us, and we're overwhelmed. Pacific Islanders are overwhelmed with the kinds of aggressive predatory activities of fishing companies, and frankly also some fishing nations who support that activity.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think we're going into like a pretty big topic here, but this we're all at the tail end, hopefully, of the pandemic. I mean, people are still wearing masks. People are being vaccinated again, and we've all had to adapt to things we never thought we would ever accept. You know, not seeing our friends, not seeing our family. We would never have dreamt the government could tell us those things. And I actually think that we are in an age where we need a bigger government to say what we can and can't do on planet Ocean, because they've got the power to be able to set the regulation in place and enforce that regulation to stop the sea being destroyed and make sure that it can live, or we can live in harmony with the sea again. I don't think that's impossible. We've seen record levels of finance mobilized during the pandemic. We've seen changes on us as individuals that we've just accepted. So I think we're going to see a decade where we're going to need to see much bigger interventions around the ocean to make sure truly we intervene on the industries that are destroying it. You're already doing amazing work in your country, but in much of the world that isn't the case at the moment. And at Surfers Against Sewage, as part of our other campaigns, we've been calling for much stronger enforcement of marine protected areas where that sort of huge industrial fishing is outlawed, where we've got highly or fully protected marine areas that will correlate to work that Dan and the Blue Marine are doing, and actually connecting people with that so they understand the benefits of the marine environment, of a healthy, thriving ocean, and how that is essential to all of us, not just those of us who are lucky enough to live by the sea in Cornwall or elsewhere in the world, but to every single person on planet Ocean. It's vital that we let nature thrive again, not just restore it, but map blue carbon habitats and vital habitats that Blue Marine and others are doing to protect the pristine habitats that are still there, and then restore other areas that are vital and important to us, kelp, seagrass, mangroves, all of those things. And the public don't understand it properly because it's hidden under the surface. We don't see it, just as we don't see the kelp for investments. People just don't see it. What's out of sight is out of mind. That's why they don't necessarily respond to the plastic pollution problem either, because it sinks away, out of sight, out of mind. We export our rubbish to other countries, and it's all done. But we need to live in a global society that is fair and just, and we do a transition that probably ultimately levels down people, because we keep talking about leveling up. We hear a lot inside about how we're going to transition to a new economy. Everyone's going to have an electric car. Everyone's going to have more stuff, more stuff, more stuff. But it's the junk economy that's actually driving the destruction of both land and sea. We don't need more stuff. People have to have less stuff. Let's not forget that just 10% of the world own 85% of the wealth on this planet. That's just not good enough. We've got to have a just transition.
Definitely, thank you. And I think the other thing with our oceans is they are vast. They are absolutely huge. They are so deep. They've got so much potential. But when you're out in the middle of them, having not seen another boat or another human being for days on end, it really brings home just how huge they are. So, carrying this out, it is going to need to be financed and managed effectively, because it needs to be policed as well. If we're going to stop overfishing, dredge fishery, etc., then we need to look at ways in which to support that, not just financially, but emotively as well, from different nations, as you say, in terms of cultural and behaviour change, but also in terms of, policing it. So really important. You talk about inequality, and I think that's a huge issue that riddles our entire planet. And has a massive impact on environmental issues as well, including the ocean. Lauren, I don't know, you kind of talked a little bit about this in your presentation, so I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more about the impacts of that on environmental activism and obviously the impacts too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. A little while ago, a small video about my work made it onto Facebook, and I'm not on Facebook, my mom is, and she said, you absolutely have to watch this video, and have you read the comments? And I thought, well, what could possibly be in the comments? It's plastics and satellites, and yeah, I should have seen that coming. So the xenophobia, the racism, the othering of the marine plastic pollution issue was quite shocking to me, but it shouldn't have been. I was so naive, because naturally, if you're in a developed country, you put your plastic in the bin, and out of sight, out of mind. And there's this big feeling, and the stuff that was said was, why isn't this video in Chinese? This is a developing world problem, not a developed world problem. And that's so untrue. And what I like about my work is I was just as able to find plastics of Canada and Scotland as I was to find it of Vietnam or of South Africa. And globally, interconnectedly, this isn't an other person problem or issue. We are absolutely connected, and this othering needs to end. And it's really important that I get that message out there. And in my science, but also in the public sort of communication work that I do, it's not a developing world problem. This is absolutely a developed world problem as well. And we cannot afford to fall into those old tropes. And I see it in the media all the time, so be vigilant. It is not an othering issue. This is not about rivers in Asia. This is about what we do right here and right now. So, yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone's got anything else they want to add to that before I jump over to Jennifer to ask a little bit about the project that you've been doing, which is a great example of ecotourism.
So one of the things that was born out of the Palau National Marine Sanctuary was it originated from how do we protect the tourism asset? How do we make sure that when we grow that tourism sector and we have more and more and more people, and some of them are not as eco-minded as we are, they're not as sensitive to the space. And in fact, we had an incursion, if you want to call it, of first-time travelers. So these are folks who came and they came in with their first time ever having a passport, and we thought, okay, how do we communicate with them? How do we talk to them? You're absolutely correct. We do need to communicate in every language. We need to express that Palau is sensitive in that way. But at the same time, let's use that marketing insight and just put it in their stamp. Put it in the immigration arrival stamp so that when they see it, it's in language, it's written by and designed by the children of Palau, so it's coming from a child's perspective. These were based off of letters that they'd written to visitors. And then they could sign the pledge saying that when they are here in Palau, the last thing that they will leave, or the only thing that will leave is their footprint. Now that sounds very minimal and sort of very sort of nice to have, but the reality is it's culturally appropriate, and I think I didn't say enough about this at the start of my sort of introduction. We needed to find a way to police these first-time travelers that was appropriate to us as a people. So I've got my American veneer on, I can speak to you, I'm confident, but if you get a typical Palauan kid up here on stage, they'll say 5 things, they'll be very meaningful, but that's all that they'll say because that's what's culturally appropriate. We're not a poppy that stands out community. And so we needed to find a way that the individuals who are out on the water with these visitors could basically say, hey, you know, remember you signed this pledge, please be mindful, don't feed the sharks, or don't step on the coral, or please stop taking the coral. That was another problem that we encountered with first-time travelers. So I think this connection of making sure that they realize that they also have a responsibility, that is also part of our tradition. It is not the job of the police officer or the Marine Ranger to call out. You don't need to call everybody. When the chief says we're going to do something, when they call a bull, that's what our marine sanctuary is, a modern version of a bull. When they call a bull, what that means is it's everybody's responsibilities. We're not sitting there pointing fingers. And I can't tell you how many panels I saw this past few weeks where people are just kind of pointing fingers at each other. It's like, well, it's that guy's job, and then it's he needs to finance, and then that guy needs a process, and it's just, it's too much for a normal person to get and to sort of try to compartmentalize and then activate. So it's just a simple message of it's everyone's responsibility, and you know what you're doing, right? You have to be true to yourself. And so that's what we're asking our visitors to do, is just be true to yourself, and you know that we have a fragile ecosystem, and our culture is our environment. We are not born environmentalists. We're born Palauan who know how our space needs to be in order for us to thrive. And so I just wanted to share that we're not born environmentalists. We're not unique in that way. We're born Palauan, and this is true of Tahiti. It's true of Fiji, Yap, Chuuk, Koshrai, all those places. We're born into our culture, into our space over millennia of learning how to be able to have thriving lives within an ecosystem that continues to help contribute to those thriving lives. And we hope that that's what's interesting to people to come to, right? Is that culture of conservation is what people want to come and see, and we want to perpetuate it. We want to perpetuate our language as well.
Absolutely. I think the key theme there is collaboration is key, and listening and learning from each other, particularly those communities and people that have been living more sustainably within the environment for a really long period of time. So thank you. And yeah, I'd love to come almost just to get the stamp in my passport. It looks pretty cool online. Dan, you mentioned about Youth Voice, and we've all spoken about youth, and I love the fact that the Project Palau is a youth initiative, if you like. A question I've got before we take it over to take some questions from both online and from our audience is, youth voice has obviously been amplified and has been a driving force in helping to raise a lot of the issues that are taking place, and youth have been given a platform for that, which I think has been phenomenal. Something that I want to ask, though, is the people that work with youth, the youth workers, the teachers, the parents as well, how or what advice would you give those people to help empower, educate and facilitate opportunities for our youth to take action? Because we talk about let's youth take action and, you know, things like that, but let's have a think about how we can facilitate that, particularly when they're young enough to not necessarily be financially independent. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on that you can feed into the discussion, because I'm sure there's lots of people that would love to know.
Yeah, I have no specific expertise in this space whatsoever, but I was talking to an environment minister yesterday who was saying, you ocean people are much too nice. All the time, you're much too nice, you're much too polite. You need to be much more demanding. And there's various things that we could do in the ocean that are not actually that hard. They're low-hanging fruit. They're very complicated. You know, they're huge things. You know, protect the high seas, protect Antarctica, put a moratorium on deep-sea mining, protect the deep sea. None of those things are conceptually actually that complicated. Remove subsidies for fishing, you know? It's not that hard. So I'd like to see the young being very, very demanding about that and impatient. And that might actually make it happen.
Yeah, look, I agree with Dan. They should be impatient. They should be demanding of leaders now, because, you know, I think it's all too often in these sorts of conferences and in the world at large, leaders will look to young people and say that they're going to come along later and clean up the mess that they've created. And actually what young people are really asking for, in my opinion, and from what I understand, is for change right now, and we need change right now to solve some of these problems. And you know, we work with we've got over 1 million school children in our education program, brilliant people around the country, and the big difference with our education program is it's about empowering them to challenge leaders now, political leaders, business leaders, to write to them, to campaign and talk to them about the issues that are happening live and direct: the ocean and climate emergency, the plastic emergency, the sewage emergency, which is very live and direct in the Environment Bill at the moment, and polluting rivers right around the country. And young people's voice is really important. We've seen it over this week, just how important it is. And we've been on the inside and the outside. We've been in suits on the inside, in wetsuits on the outside. And actually the outside's so important, that pressure from Greta and others, to create that pressure cooker on the process inside. It's a bit like, you know, a diamond forming, you know, underground. It needs that pressure. And I truly believe that it will have an effect. It's going to take more time than just COP. I don't think people should be disheartened with you know, a lack of progress from COP, but I think we're starting to see cascading commitments, new conversations that weren't happening before, and that's thanks to the incredible young people around the country. So, you know, a big round of applause to all of them.
Right, if you want to... No, quite happy. Great, thank you. And I guess it's them using their voice, but also you know, as a teacher, I've been working in environmental activism for a while, so I will do anything to give the opportunity to my students. And I know that the majority of teachers and people that work with young people out there are in it for the children and giving them the opportunities. But it's just, you know, if anyone has any suggestions, whether it's online, of how, you know, or from youth themselves, people that might be watching, what support do you want to see from those that work with you, then it would be great to know, so that we can help you to amplify your voices and get those messages heard. But talking of amplifying voices, it would be great to have some questions from the audience. Show of hands, excellent. I don't know where the audience microphone is. Oh, there it is, at the back. Great. This young gent down at the front.
Very grateful that you still use the word young. Really appreciate this panel. I literally had to do some breathing exercises because I was like, oh no, you're getting too excited, like you won't be able to say what you're thinking. I'm from the Bahamas. I feel the same feelings that you feel in Palau. This climate challenge that we're facing is not something that's tomorrow, it's something that was from yesterday. We have people who are still displaced since the last hurricane, and that was 2 years ago. And then we think about the food chains, and we think about when you talk about culture, you know. When you compromise somebody's environment, you compromise not just their way of life, but the support systems that they rely on, even beyond economies. You compromise their identity, their connection to themselves, you know? And so that's very important. And then to go on to think about what you guys were saying about the plastics and how it's directly tied to this fight against climate change, and that we generate these plastics from fossil fuels and then they disintegrate and they go right back into our environment. And I think that might be one of the best ways for us to tie this whole fight in when you're talking about how do we integrate the ocean into these things, into this dialogue, you know? So would very much like to hear more about how we connect plastic pollution and this fight against climate change, maybe more about your work as far as, you know, I think you said it was sedimentary carbon sequestration in the ocean. Just looking at, you know, because we need to develop this science, because oftentimes these solutions come from, you know, one case study done by one scientist who happened to get a grant and publish this work. Yet, you know, we need to be studying this in every instance that we, you know, come at this interface. So very happy that you're making that funding available. And as far as supporting youth, in my country, I think it might be 2 years ago, an organization, you know, got youth together to foment support for banning plastic, single-use plastic use in our country. And it's like, then we look at ourselves and we go to, you know, the States and we're like, but they're using all these plastic bags and they have all so much more money than us, so much more ability. And yet, you know, why are we taking on this burden when our plastic is washing in from other countries? And so when you talk about it, but then that's where it's important, where, you know, just as developed nations might look at developing nations and have this binary view of us and them, like, we got to really just wipe that away somehow, even though, you know, history makes that difficult. Yeah. We have to get past that. And, yeah, just really enjoy this panel. And, yeah. Oh, we're trying to get Caribbean youth together. We're trying to figure out how to address these problems. And I will be reaching out to everybody just to figure out, you know, what are the next steps we can actually take to, like, make things happen. So much appreciated.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Lauren, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the question you just asked that's totally left my head because I was enthralled with the conversation and the bit at the end about getting youth together. I'm sure it was relevant to you.
Well, I mean, I just feel like you summed it up perfectly. Like, you took a lot of the thoughts and you've just connected them beautifully. So, I mean, thank you. And you're right. You experience, like a lot of countries experience work that they've done on the single-use plastic issue specifically, and then you visit other countries and you're like, whoa, this is just this crazy amounts of plastic. And I think America recycles less than 4% of their plastics, just to give you an idea. And yeah, and you're so right. I often think of it from the other way around, but if we have to work together, there's quite a bit of forgiveness that needs to be brought to that table.
I actually have a question for you. So in a situation where you do have that scenario where you have banned single-use plastics, where we've said, okay, we're going to close 80% of our EEZ, but we have all these threats, you know, and this feeling of, well, if I have closed off my EEZ, what are these other people doing? And now it's infecting the minds of the politicians. How am I to get support? And that's principally why I'm here today. I need the support of other countries and others in general to say, look, Palau, yeah, you're taking more of a step than most people are taking, but please don't stop because you're a beacon of hope. Please don't stop because. We are a tourism-driven economy. It is the majority of the revenue that comes into our country. Fisheries was a rounding error in that whole space. It's a rounding error. And so why bring it back on board to have that same rounding error even though we're struggling with no lack of tourism? We need support from other countries, from individuals that basically said, look, President of Palau, it's okay to stick to your 80%. We'll stand behind you. We'll support you. And that support really, I hope, comes in February for the Our Oceans conference because our administration is getting a lot of pressure to ratchet it back. If the rest of the world is saying 30 by 30, then why are we at 80? Why does that matter? Why should I do that? And I think the reality is somebody's always going to be the market leader. And so the attention you get for being a market leader is what we keep telling him is what's good for us, and why you get to sit on panel with these larger countries and be able to say to countries like America and other large countries like, hey, why don't you get onto the big ocean state bandwagon? Because you're not. You're on the little rounding error of 1% of your EEZ being protected or fully protected. So I didn't mean to be campaigning today, but I really feel strongly about this one, especially during this COP.
Well, it's
But
also,
thank you.
It showcases just how embarrassing our domestic marine protection is too. You know, like you're a true leader in this space. The gulf between that and our the way we manage our own domestic waters is huge, and it's really important to showcase that. So thanks.
Woo! Great, thank you very much. And do we want to do a quick question from somebody online, I think? You did have your hand up. She's put the iPad away.
Thank you. I was just captivated by your answers. So I'm literally like, oh gosh, trying to get
Not just me. That's good.
it was beautiful. I have a question from Lee, actually, and he's asking, what role do marine protected areas have in protecting the ocean in the next decade? If they are insufficient now, what can be done to improve their impacts?
Great, thank you. Do you want to kick us off, Dan?
Okay. I mean, as many of us in this room will know, some of it practically got it tattooed on us. The world is aligning around a target of at least 30% by 2030, properly protected. And my colleague and friend, Professor Callum Roberts, who's just gone back today, and a number of other scientists agree that that's the level at which the ocean has sustainable health. However, there's lots of detail in that. You know, the small parts of that sentence, at least, is key and gets dropped a lot. You know, there's a gulf between 30% and 80%, and that's all important. And then there's the definition of protection itself. Like, what does protected mean? What does it really mean when you get down to brass tacks? And the devil really is in the detail here.
Yeah, look, can I just add to that, because we fully support that goal, but I think it's important to talk about the protection from the emissions that we've sort of heard about today. I mean, how are we protecting the ocean and all of those marine protected areas, fully protected areas, from carbon emissions, from plastic emissions, and the chemicals, the pharmaceuticals that are being pumped out into the ocean, the nitrates around the world. So, you know, our job is to not only protect and restore and preserve the ocean and have this huge program of highly protected and fully protected marine areas, but also really tackle the industries that are decimating the environment. And here we're really focused on, you know, the transition away from fossil fuels, of course, at COP26, but it's not just fossil fuels. It's, in this country, sewage pollution, millions of hours that are being pumped into the environment, into our rivers and coastline, that have a hugely detrimental effect on the habitats that we're trying to restore. And so we've got to do both of those things, and we've got to have a moratorium on the businesses that are truly destroying planet ocean, and move to a decade of restoration and protection.
And just remember, there's BB&J, right? So you can, if all the countries in the world decide they're going to protect 30% of their EEZs, we still wouldn't make 30%. Yeah. There's all this vast ocean outside of those that belong to individual countries, and there's a whole discussion that nobody ever hears about. What's BB&J? It sounds like peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Can I get my PBJ? Well, BB&J is biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, and they're going through UN negotiations right now, and they debate these little texts, you know, little words that are going to define how fisheries happens in between people's EEZs. You know, there's this is the kind of thing that you know, places like Palau have a challenge with. Places like Micronesia, where most of the fishery stock is still relatively healthy, and most of the high-grade tuna is coming out of. And we have our little organizations, the parties to the NARI agreement, all these Micronesian countries getting together and saying you can fish in our waters, but you can't fish in these high seas pockets. That's the rule for being able to fish in our EZ. Those are the kinds of things that y'all need to go to school and get smart about, or just read the heck out of them, because those are the kinds of little texts that get into these international fora, and then we're stuck with them.
Absolutely.
So I just, there's more to it than this, and frankly, activism is the only way to go about it now. There is political will that needs to get into play, and we need to be aggressive about that. But at the same time, we need to look at big corporates who are operating in these spaces that just are lawless. And those are the guys that are really doing so much incredibly extreme damage.
Great, thank you. So again, back to collaboration and back to education. Earlier it was mentioned edX. It's a really good resource of free online educational programs, university level, learning a lot about the oceans. So if you've heard today about whether it be blue carbon or various different acronyms that have been thrown around, I'm sure there's something for everyone on there should you want to learn more and educate yourselves as well. I think we're going to have to end. I'm so sorry, we're already 10 minutes over time, and I'm getting little nods from people around the back. No, we can carry on? Oh, great, excellent, yeah, go for it.
I just want to say, like Hugo probably knows about this, about the emergency that's happening on our coast. We've got about 15-mile stretch from 20 miles, about a 20-mile stretch along our coast on the northeast of England, where all the crustaceans have just come up. And there's absolutely hundreds and hundreds of thousands of crabs, lobsters, everything have just washed up. And it looks like it's a one-off event. I don't think it's poisoning. And the surfers are on Saltburn, they tend to surf there. Now, there's a lot of people are frightened to take the kids on the beaches, the dogs on the beaches, because they don't know what's happening. But something's caused this, and it's our lifestyle that's caused it. You can't pinpoint. I don't know who'd be able to find out. I know they've gone to the environmental agencies to find out if it is poisoning, but the amount that's come up in just like 1 or 2 days is just incredibly, that doesn't look like poison. But it's our lifestyle that's caused it, without a doubt, so we really need to change fast.
I couldn't agree more. I don't think anyone knows what the cause is yet. I think it is with the EA. I know they're doing tests on what's being washed up, but is it one of the tipping points? What is it? I know the region's got lots of sewage around too, but I don't think that's the driving cause. But it could be composite and compound causes of that. So we'll wait to see. But I agree. Our lifestyles are damaging the planet, the richest, and I include myself in that. We're doing things that are beyond the sustainability level. I always actually think back, just to give a sort of personal anecdote of salmon when I was a boy, which was a long time ago now. I'm sort of rivaling Charles, I think, on the sort of age front. Salmon was something that was a treat at Christmas. Now people eat it every single day of the week and expect to be able to eat it, and it's causing havoc in our oceans with intensive salmon farming and the decimation of wild fish stocks. So it's just an example of how our lives are completely out of kilter with the nature around us, and how we need to give nature a place to thrive. And that, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily just need scientists. It's about just fencing off nature. We heard Zach Goldsmith speaking inside COP26 yesterday in the Blue Zone about the Second World War, when they couldn't fish in the Atlantic as much, or in the North Sea, or at all, and fish stocks bounced back. Didn't take any monitoring or evaluation, just took not doing industrial fishing, full stop.
And that's the point of a traditional bull. That's exactly, these traditions have history, and just leaving it alone makes a difference.
If I may add, so there are scientists at PML who are working on what you've just described, what could be contributing to these massive kill-offs and these die-offs, because seabirds are also being affected. And what are the things that we can't see? The stuff that's washing up is perhaps a fraction of what's actually happening under the surface of the water. So scientists are working with the agencies to try and answer that question. But we talked about MPAs as well, and things like nitrates being pushed into the water, nurdles, untreated sewage, plastics, they do not obey boundaries. They don't care. They're going to move into places that we may have think are safeguarded, but actually, you know, there's nothing stopping these things from moving into protected areas and decimating what's trying to recover there. And so, yes, that is land management practices, as you say. What are we putting into the water that's crossing these boundaries and causing these impacts? And yeah, it's just devastating, and I feel that as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Who's got the mic? Right. If we go over here, and then we can always nip over there.
Hey, I can't stop looking at this Nestle logo, so I've got a two-part
It
question.
caught my eye this morning as well.
So I don't want to have a go at anyone, but the two-part question is, I'm interested to know why that's okay. And then I guess for Dan and Hugo and maybe the others of you, it's a tricky thing to do. We need to get money to raise awareness, science, all of that. How do we navigate that? And I'm not going to pick too much of the Nestle thing, but it's burning at me. And so how do we navigate that? Because we need to take money, we need to use money from places, but from them?
Name and shame. I'm all for it. I think one of the things that's recently come out is the Minderoo Foundation published a report of some of the top funders of single-use plastics. And the number one bank bankrolling the production of single-use plastics is Barclays Bank. And I used to be part of Barclays. And, you know, this is not me advocating, this is me taking scientific evidence and going, I don't want to bank with Barclays anymore. And it's the same with Nestle. They were one of the 4 names that came up in that tier fund organization: Coca-Cola, Nestle, and PepsiCo and Unilever. And it is. I walked in and I went, okay. But I think, you know, if they want to give us money, that's fine. But they have to understand that we're still going to name and shame.
Where do you think the Minderoo Foundation money comes from? Yeah. So but the source of that wealth is mining, and like
Totally
I'm not trying to score a point or anything. What I'm trying to point out is that it's a complicated question and it's nuanced. And I think I've taken money from some people who I'm not hugely proud about. The reason why I would take that money is because I'd much rather it was spent on ocean conservation than people's Ferraris or a house in Ibiza or whatever. I think the key thing to navigate, and I think that there's real villains in this space, I think the key thing you have to navigate is, what's the quid pro quo? What are you doing to them? And is it in any way ever going to modify your own behavior and your activism and what you're trying to achieve? And I think it's a complicated question. It's grey, like everything else, but
yeah, look, and I think probably within the environmental, the conservation sort of NGO space, I don't think it's like amazing to call each other out, because it plays into the hands of the polluter quite often. I mean, we're a really campaign-focused organisation, and we will call the brands out. We do an annual, one of the biggest brand audits in the world on plastic pollution on our beaches. Thousands of volunteers taking part, tens of thousands of items surveyed, and always the top offenders: Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, McDonald's, Mondelez, the big brands behind plastic pollution. And they want to keep plastic pollution as a thing that they describe as litter. It's all about us as individuals, but they're failing to provide the systems that can contain and control the plastics they produce, and that's why we see so much plastic in the environment. It's their failure, not us as individuals. We mustn't litter, of course, but ultimately it's their failure. They're causing this pollution. It's pollution, not litter, and we should be clear about the language on it. We will call them out. As an organisation, we'll refuse money from people too. We've been offered tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds by Coca-Cola and others over time. We've said no to it. It's not within our policy. However, we will work with progressives too. We're not anti-business. Business is important. We all need an economy to live in, so we can't just shut down the economy. So we need to help move it in the right direction and faster over the coming years.
Absolutely, and sometimes you can have more influence working with companies than working against them. So, you know, as you said, it's a very, very complex issue, but a very astute question. I'm afraid that we have actually really honestly run out of time now. But I do want to thank all of you for coming and all of your questions that you've put forward to the audience. I'm sure we will be around for a little bit afterwards if you've got any further questions or want to have any further discussions. But just like to have a massive round of applause for our panellists. And a big thank you as well to Extreme, Blue Marine Foundation and One Young World for actually having on its own Oceans Day, which obviously wasn't necessarily replicated in COP. So excellent. Thank you very much, everybody.